Welcome into another edition of the Musketeer Report Podcast. We're recording this one on Tuesday, November 5th, and the Musketeers are coming off a 78-69 season opening win over Texas Southern on Monday night. Paul Fritschner is joining me. We're going to spend most of the podcast tonight talking about that Musketeers win in the season opener, talk about some of the good, some of the bad. But first, before we get to any of that, I do want to make it clear that we have a 50% off sale going on at Musketeer Report right now. The season is back. The message board is rolling. People are fired up. We've got a lot of good basketball talk already because, quite frankly, there was a lot to talk about after that first game. And so if you want to join the conversation, if you're a Xavier fan that is all in this season, make sure you sign up for musketeerreport.com and get the big discount right now, 50% off. All right, Paul, I guess the first thing I want to start off with is I think you see that score 78-69. There's not a lot of positive vibes coming out of that first game because fans wanted a 30-point win to boost the metrics, boost the net at the end of the year. But there were some definite positives to take from this game. Start us off. Give me one positive that you took away from this win.
I'll do you one better, Rick. I'll give you two. I'll give you Zach Fremantle playing exactly as we kind of hoped he would play. And I think we hoped he would play as well as he did last night, maybe a few games into the season, but this speaks to how long he's been healthy and how long he's been playing at the level at which he played last night. You know, we've talked for so long that he was cleared back early on in practice and preseason and everything else, and he's had a full go of it for so long that he looked like himself last night. So that's one. And then for two, it was Ryan Conwell. He took a few shots to warm up, but from there, he settled in. He was the game's leading scorer, or at least for Xavier. He tied for the game lead at 21 points, 5 threes, 6 for 12 overall from the field. Didn't turn the ball over, grabbed 3 rebounds. I mean, for all of the preseason expectations that we put on a guy like Ryan Conwell to come out there in the home opener, Conwell, Fremantle, 2 major positives for Xavier last night, and really carried Xavier to a win. Fremantle's double-double and then Conwell's timely shots. Without those two, we're talking about a whole different ball game, but luckily this year for Xavier, they did have those two, and they got the win.
Yeah, I mean, you have the moment of Zach Fremantle and Jerome Hunter both just being back, getting on the floor, playing, getting that warm reception from the Cintas Center faithful. That was a cool moment. But then it became a little bittersweet for Jerome because he really struggled in the game, wasn't able to finish off some of his shots. We'll talk more about that. For Zach, it was unbelievable to see him look like he didn't miss a beat. I mean, and Sean Miller kind of alluded to that in his press conference afterward, that it's like for him to be able to come out and have a double-double like that, finish around the basket the way he did, run the court, play 33 minutes and really be in great shape the way he is. That's pretty impressive stuff right there. And I don't think it was always the best preseason for Zach in terms of practice and getting what they wanted out of him each and every day. But like Zach typically does, when the lights were on and there were real games at stake, he showed up when it mattered.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that was encouraging. But again, between him and Conwell, the two of them, 2 very experienced players, you got what you were hoping for. And that's really all you can ask for.
Yeah, the interesting thing about Conwell's game, or his performance in this game, was that it didn't feel like we got some of the good, clean looks out of the offense that they had been getting for him in the preseason, especially like whether it be the Dayton game where he didn't score a ton, or just some of the scrimmages that we've seen throughout the practices each week that they would do, where they'd invite refs in and they'd play an inter-squad scrimmage. They've run so much good offense for him, running him off of screens, running set plays, all types of things, actions within the flow game to get him clean looks. I didn't see as much of that in this game. And in some ways, that might be a positive because it's like, well, they can definitely find more creative ways to get him free, get him more opportunities. But he was able to do it almost on his own in this one, where he was hitting like some tough step backs, sidestepping guys, making some plays in transition. I thought, there was some good and bad to take from that part of his performance. But overall, the end result is you feel pretty optimistic about what's still to come from Ryan Conwell.
Yeah, and you could tell he was a type of guy that fed off the energy. I really liked the emotion at points when he was hitting a couple of threes, and you could tell that he was as involved in the game as he needed to be. He was locked in. He was hitting shots. He was making plays, tough plays too, playmaking. Yeah, you're right. I think him being able to go out there and recognize that nobody else is hitting shots. Somebody needs to, and I'm going to be the one to do it. Made a significant impact.
Another guy that I would point out for a bright spot in this game is Davion McKnight. I thought he was consistent throughout this game. He gave them what they needed from an offensive standpoint and scoring standpoint when really not a lot of guys on the roster stepped up. And it's funny because coming into this season, Sean Miller has talked up Davion McKnight so much. And we just saw all the Big East coaches voted him onto the All Big East preseason second team. So obviously there's been a lot of praise for him, especially from the coaches in the league. And while I respect Davion's game and I think highly of them, I've been a little bit of the opinion that, like, man, I hope he can live up to all this praise because, for half the year last year, I thought he was really good. But the other half, it was, you could take it or leave. I mean, he was decent to good, but not like second team All Big East good, I wouldn't say. And so I was kind of curious to see how the type of start he would get off to this year. And really, based on this performance, it would look like he's picking up right where he left off at the end of last season when he was playing his best.
Yeah, 8 for 8 from the free throw line too, which is not nothing because when you have a point guard that can drive, that can finish through contact, a couple of nifty plays just to get space to the basket to lay the ball in, but also to get to the line, to make all 8 of the free throws. Pretty limited shot selection, especially from deep, only 1 for 2 from 3, but to finish with 19 points, 5 assists. Yeah, I thought it was a great game for Davion.
And no turnovers.
Exactly.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, the whole team, really, that was another bright spot. We can go right there. Only 9 turnovers for the entire team. And there's 2 things to add to that. One, Texas Southern is a team whose calling card is their defensive pressure, their intensity. They try to get you to turn the ball over. They try to make you uncomfortable. So it was good that Xavier is able to withstand that without coughing the ball up too much. And the second part of it is there's a lot of new pieces. There's a lot of chemistry that has to be found still for this offense. And while it looked rough at times last night and it was choppy at times, the fact that they're not throwing the ball all over the place and giving away a lot of possessions is a really good sign.
Sean talked in the post-game press conference about the first game jitters. And that was the thing that kept coming back to me and I kept thinking about throughout the game. And I'll call back to something that you and I talked about in the preseason podcast where I asked you after the Dayton game, what did you think about that Dayton game? What do you think we can learn from it? And your response to me was, we just know that we were right in what we were watching, that the team was very talented offensively. There was areas that they could grow, but that they were a really talented offensive team that could hit a lot of shots, especially from 3. Last night was not the team that we have watched for the last 5 to 6 months in the preseason. Last night was probably about as poor as we have seen them play in the last 5 months. And I think that speaks to the potential of this team and the fact that, as many pointed out on the message board today, we could have been talking about an entirely different story if this was last year's team. But this year's team just had purely enough talent and enough grit on this roster to go out there and at the end of the day score more points than the other guys. The problem, though, as you pointed out in the beginning of this show, is that if you're going to schedule like this, you need to blow these teams out. You need to win by 30. You need to win by 40. You need to win by 50, as we saw a lot of other teams around the country do last night. When you win a game against Texas Southern by 9 points, that's going to ding you in the computer metrics. I mean, KenPom, they dropped 13 spots or something last night from 30 to 43. So if you look all the way down the list at the things that went right versus the things that went wrong, you'd probably say more things went wrong than went right. But I never had a feeling of nervousness during the game. My kind of angst or anxiety came from about 10 minutes to go in the game, where I thought, I'm not worried about this team because this is not at all who they've been for 5 months. But you got to win this game. Like, you got to figure out a way here to grind this out in the last 10 minutes and win the game. And that's exactly what they did. I don't anticipate this going forward. If we see this same, performance on Friday and next Tuesday, then you start to scratch your head, because then you're going, wait, hold on a second. What did we just watch for 5 months? Where did that team go that we saw play up at Dayton and be as dominant as they were? But I'm not at all nervous after what we saw last night.
Yeah, well, we're going to get into some of the negative and talk more specifically about those things that happened that weren't so good here in a second. I want to get more thoughts on that. But let's wrap up a few more of these positive things here. I just want to get your thoughts on Dalen Swain, another guy that showed some flashes in this game. I thought the big thing that jumps out to me when I look at his box score is 8 of 9 at the free throw line. I mean, the entire team got to the free throw line a ton in this one, but Dalen is a guy that he shouldn't have to do anything special or out of the ordinary or impressive on the offensive end to end up with 10 points every game. Him just being a great athlete and running the floor hard in this offense should get him enough opportunities to get to 10 points naturally in transition. And I think that's what you saw in this game. He scored his points without needing his number called in the half court, without needing to run anything for him, without having to do anything too special. He was just running the floor hard, using Euro steps in transition, getting fouled on his way to the basket. And I think he can continue to build on that, but that's what you hope is kind of like the bar for him to every single night. You need to play that way where you're running hard, you're getting free throw attempts, and you're getting those buckets in transition.
Yeah, finished with 14 points. And I think the other thing there too, Rick, is there were times where it felt like he recognized his need to be aggressive. There was one play, particularly from the wing, where he was kind of standing there and he took maybe one extra dribble than he should have and realized nobody that was in front of him. He thought, well, okay, instead of just pulling up for three, I'll go ahead and be physical, either get to the line. I forget what happened at the end of that play, but I think he may have gotten fouled or at least finished for a layup. It might have been an and one. Either way, the point is, let's be aggressive. Let's make something in this play. And it turned into something positive for Xavier as opposed to, hold on, this isn't my strength to stand back here and shoot from three instead of being able to drive.
Yeah, and I think that was a key in the first half, later in the first half, and especially in the second half, was like Xavier was hesitant at times. And there were times where it felt like they were trying to force feed the post. And because Texas Southern was fronting, it was like, okay, we're stuck in the spot a little bit. We're not moving the ball quickly enough. And I think at a certain point, Dalen was one of the guys who recognized, like, I'm just a better athlete than the guy in front of me. I'm just going to go by him, go to the rim, and get our offense moving in a positive direction.
What did you think defensively, Rick, of his job on, I think, Kavion McLean finished with 21, but that switch on to him kind of changed the game.
Yeah, I think that definitely made a difference for Xavier, and they needed someone to slow him down. I tell you what, one thing you got to give Texas Southern credit for is they were scheduled because they're supposed to be one of the worst offensive teams in the country, outside the top 300 in offensive efficiency last year. They're expected to be there again this year. And I think that's why, Xavier's looking to beat them handily because of that. I did not see a terrible offensive team in this game. Now, they're still Texas Southern. I have no idea how many games they're going to win this year. I'm not trying to make some excuse for Xavier like they ran into a buzzsaw on Monday night, but there were some impressive jump shots hit in this game. There was some skill being shown by the Tigers to where I didn't see a team that looked like one of the worst offenses in the entire country.
No, there were some wild shots that they hit, though. I mean, just step backs or
contested
threes. Yeah, crazy shots that, if you think Xavier, so both teams take 23 threes, right? If Xavier shoots even a decent percentage, because he finished at 26%, if they shoot even a decent percentage and go 10 for 23, and 4 of those banked in or circus threes from Texas Southern don't go in, that's a 24-point swing that you're talking about right there. And then all of a sudden it balloons into that blowout win that you're talking about. That's where you kind of just think water eventually would find its level in a game like this. And it never really did until Xavier just kind of clawed away at the end.
The last thing I had on my list from a positive standpoint, if you have any others, feel free to point them out. But we've mentioned it with each individual, I guess, but we've got to mention it from a team standpoint because this is what the lower bowl is most excited about after this performance. 82.9% on 41 free throw attempts, Paul. That's going to get some of the lower bowl fired up.
That's right. That's right. The stripe work that we've talked so much about. We talked about it on the Sean Miller podcast. I would like to point out, self-brag, I went 50 for 50 right before the game. So I'd like to think that maybe I warmed up the nets for those guys. But
yeah, well, from what we heard, they really needed it this summer. They didn't shoot very well on their own. They really needed you to get them going. But this is something we've talked about with this group that should be a strength of this team. And
absolutely.
If you're getting the right guys to the free throw line, and that definitely happened in this game. And Texas Southern helped them out by putting them at the free throw line constantly. But it made the game choppy. And if you weren't going to make those free throws, your offense could have been in big trouble.
Yeah, I mean, there was no flow. It never felt like there was any flow to the game, any rhythm. Just almost every possession, there was some sort of a whistle, or it was a funky turnover, or it was a foul, or somebody was going to the line, whatever it was. And to Xavier's credit, in some years, they wouldn't hit the free throws that matter. This year, this is a very, very good free throw shooting team. I mean, John Hughley missed a free throw. He rarely misses free throws. He was 1 for 2 from the line. Jerome Hunter missed his first 2 free throws. Again, this number could have been even better, and at 83%, I think everybody'd be pretty happy with that.
Ryan Conwell's 5 3-pointers and the team's free throw shooting, in my opinion, were the 2 biggest factors in the win. That's what won the game for Xavier. All right. Now, there were a lot of negatives, like we talked about at the top of the broadcast, that fans are bringing up. And so I want to do a little segment here where I'm going to ask you, I'm going to bring up one of the negative things, one of the negative storylines from this game. And I want you to say, is it legitimately concerning? Is it a total non-issue and just an aberration? Or is it something where we're going to have to wait and see more of first?
Okay.
Let's go with something you've already talked about. The fact that the strength of this team was supposed to be that they have multiple shooters and scorers on the roster. In this one, they only have 4 players even able to find the bottom of the net. The rest of the team combined to go 0 for 16 from the field. They had 0 shots made off of the players by the players off of the bench. Only scored 78 points overall. Where you come out on that? Concerning, non-issue, or wait and see?
I'd say absolute non-issue. I think this team is way too talented offensively to run into that kind of an issue again. I mean, I just don't think you're going to see another game this year where that combination of players of Dante Maddox and Trey Green and Marcus Foster go 0 from 3. I just don't think that's going to happen.
I totally agree about the fact that you're not going to see another shooting performance like that. There's no way all those guys are going to go 0 for again. I do wonder, and this is, I would say, in terms of what level I would have this concern at, it's minor. It's pretty low, but there is some level of concern of you did just reload your roster with mid-major guys making the jump up, right? Last year, you did at least have a guy who was a big-time athlete that could break you down off the dribble, and Desmond Claude kind of initiate the offense when you're getting bogged down. Is there some concern that maybe they just don't have good enough athletes on the offensive end? They don't have that guy who can boogie off the dribble, create for everybody, and break the defense down. Are they going to get stagnant too often at times this year when teams pressure them because they're not as athletic? And again, I'd say the concern for that is low, but that's where my head started to go when I looked into like how much of a concern is this really. That's the only way I can see it being a lingering problem.
Yeah, I would agree with that, but I don't think that this is going to be an issue for Xavier.
Okay, what about the backup guard minutes? You look at Trey Green and Dante Maddox. We've been talking about these two leading up to the season, that it feels like they're kind of battling it out for that extra guard spot that's going to sub in and take a big role off of the bench. Now, they're both going to play, I think, but it feels like there's an opportunity for one of them to really take hold of that extra guard role. And in this game, neither one of them really did much to think that they'd be playing a lot at all. Trey Green was 0 for 3 from the field, had some bad defensive moments in his 9 minutes of action. Dante Maddox was 0 for 2, had some missteps, and he only played 11 minutes in this one. Where would you come out on the backup guard minutes?
I'd go concerning on both fronts, because on Trey's side, it's things that we had seen last year that you were hoping you had gotten through and passed and grown from. And on Dante's side, it was things that we had talked about from the preseason that now have carried over into the first game of the regular season that, again, we didn't really see at Dayton, which is so weird in saying all of this. That's where I keep coming back to. If you didn't have the Dayton experience, I think I would be a whole lot more nervous about last night.
Yeah.
But playing that Dayton team and being as dominant as they were in that game, regardless, forget the Dayton aspect of it as far as like the rotations that Dayton played, whatever.
Right.
Just purely from Xavier's perspective in that game, mano-a-mano, the 5 guys on the court versus 5 other players on the court, Xavier looked really good in that game. And that's where I take all of this with a grain of salt. But things that were concerning about Trey and were concerning about Dante leading into the season cropped up in a big way last night. And that's where I think you're going to keep an eye on those two going forward.
Yeah, and a lot of it boils down to getting the defensive side of things right. For Trey, we've already seen the same issues last year coming up again. He has to fight through screens better. He can't get lost when he's off the ball at all. He's got to just be tougher overall on that end and not get bullied for easy points. And for Dante, it's more of a got to understand the system, got to stay within the system, got to stay locked in within the system throughout entire possessions. And they haven't been able to do that, which is concerning. From an offensive standpoint, I think both of those guys can give you something, but you have to be able to trust them, and they have to make good decisions when they're trying to give you something on the offensive end, because they are capable of being productive, but you're not going to be able to live with that production if you can't trust them for short spurts at a time with the game on the line. And that's, I think, where the big concern comes from, is just that the coaching staff in tight games, when you really need an extra burst or a little bit more offense from one of those guys, are you going to be able to trust them to put them into those tight spots?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, rebounding. XU allowed 8 offensive rebounds, which led to 12 second chance points. That was a big topic of conversation on the message board after this one. What did you feel about the rebounding? Is that a big concern, not a concern, or we just have to wait?
I'm going to wait and see on this one.
I'm with you.
It did make me a little kind of tentative, just because you felt the loss of somebody like Traore in there who could have just cleaned up the glass at points. So that's where, to me, I want to wait and see more. I'm not going to let one game against Texas Southern dictate my thoughts on the rebounding. I want to see it. Let's get through Wake Forest. Let's get down to Florida, and by that time you'll have a big enough sample size. There were points to be concerned. There were other points where it was just the flow of the game that I thought played out on the rebounding side. So I'm gonna wait and see on that one.
I'm going to say wait and see, especially if all you're basing it off of is this performance here on Monday night, because I honestly, yes, you don't want to give up 8 offensive rebounds and 12 second chance points to Texas Southern. And there were at least 2 of them, one specifically where John Hughley completely missed a box out, and another where Zach Fremantle probably wasn't physical enough, kind of got pushed under, and then another guy behind the guy that pushed him under was able to get an easy stick back opportunity. But for the most part, the other offensive rebounds I saw, it's balls that were long 3-point shots, clanging off the back iron and bouncing 10, 12 feet out over the heads of guys, where it's like, okay, yeah, you'd like your team to be all gang rebounding and maybe a guard sneaks in there and gets that ball or something where it's more of a loose ball situation. But it's not like your big guys are getting bullied underneath the rim and they can't handle themselves under there. That would be more my concern as it relates to this team not being able to rebound. That's what we saw last year from this group. I have my concerns about that for certain, just because I had them before Lucina Traore got hurt. He was going to be the best interior rebounder. Now that he's gone, it becomes an even bigger concern. But I don't think we saw enough in this game to decide that, this team is a terrible rebounding team and it's really going to be a huge issue again. It might be, but I don't think we saw enough here to clearly state that. One of the other things was Texas Southern's 3-point shooting. They were 10 for 23 from beyond the arc, 43.5%. They were 6 of 13 in the first half, which I thought the defense in the second half got better, even despite them still making 4 of 10. First half was a little bit more concerning, I would say. But what were your overall thoughts in terms of how big of a concern this is?
Again, I guess I'll wait and see here. I'd lean more toward the positive end of that, though, as in not concerned toward wait and see. Some of those shots that they hit, Rick, I mean, if you're going to live with them taking those shots and they went in. So I'm not super concerned about that.
I would agree. Right now, I would say this is a non-issue. I'm not even going to go that we need to wait and see, because I think that this team is experienced enough. They're tough enough mentally that even if there's a guy like Trey Green or Dante Maddox who struggles to figure out the system and you're not going to be able to trust them, well, I think they'll just move on without one of those guys if that happens to be the case. And the other guys that are playing more will figure it out defensively. I don't think that's going to be a lingering issue long term, but I do think there were some instances in the first half where they've got to be tougher. They've got to be more aggressive fighting through screens. Their bigs have to do a better job in ball screen coverages as well. So there were some things to definitely pick apart there from the first half of that game and even into the second half. But I'm not sure how big of a long-term concern it is, especially when it comes to giving up those open 3-point looks. John Hughley, and we can really just talk about the center spot in general. We're talking about the loss of Lucina Traore. He only played 6 minutes in this one, Paul. Didn't make an impact at all. We mentioned the missed box out he had. There were a few other things where it looked like he's probably costing the team and they couldn't leave him out there. What are your thoughts on John Hughley at this point?
I would lean more toward not concerned on this one, only because I think it was I lean more on the what I've seen portion of John Hughley from practice, and also the fact that Sean kind of made it clear that we're going to see the best of John Hughley down the line this season as he continues to get in better shape. We do have a sample size of Hughley playing well and not well at the high major level. I think Hughley is going to play a factor for this team. It was a little weird that he played as poorly as he did last night. But again, I'm not super concerned about him right now through one game.
I lean more towards this being concerning, but I've been on the side of, ever since the transfer portal wrapped up, I've been talking about this is going to be the biggest storyline. Who's going to start at center? Who's going to be the center? That ended up being Lucina Traore. It became clear as time went on. But in terms of making that making you feel better about their current situation, it doesn't, right? I mean, if Lucina was clearly the starter, that means he was outplaying John Hughley by a decent amount there. And that's Sean Miller's word. That's not us just surmising that. Sean Miller has made that clear that Lucina Traore was definitely going to be the starter. So all of that would lead to me being a little bit concerned about John Hughley. Yes, we've seen him play well at the high major level at Pitt, but it's been 2 years since he's been that type of player. At some point, you have to wonder, is he going to be able to get back to that form? And this is just one game. And like you said, Sean Miller has been clear about the fact that he's going to get better as the season goes on. And I believe that. But can Xavier wait for him to get better in January or February? They might need him before that is the problem.
The only worry I would have here right now immediately is the stress it puts on Zach and Jerome to play more minutes.
Yeah. And look at Zach. He had to play 33 minutes and a lot of those minutes at center. That's a really good point. Does that put too much on him from a physical standpoint, from a foot standpoint? And then just defensively, what does that do to your team? Is he just giving up too much at a certain point in the post on the defensive end? And then finally, Hunter. He goes 0 for 5 in this one. Definitely looked like there were either some rust or nerves there on the offensive end for him. Do you feel like that's just a opening night situation?
Yeah, I'm not worried about Jerome in the slightest on this one. You could tell, I will say, there was some really cool shots of Jerome just being giddy is the best way to describe it. Just so excited to get back out there. Sean talked about it with Zach against Dayton. Just the excitement to get back out there and to play a game again. And Jerome had some decent looks, like that little fadeaway shot that he's really worked on in the offseason and kind of added more to his game there that he took a couple of times. I like that shot for him. I know it's kind of a funky shot. You might not think it is off the bat, but that's one he'll pretty consistently hit in practice. He had one look spinning to the rim that rolled around and out. He's got to see one fall. I'm not concerned about Jerome at all.
Yeah, I'm not too concerned about him either. I think this was mostly, again, either nerves, rust, whatever you want to call it, but more the emotions of the moment and him having to get back settled into the swing of things. I would add to that, though, it felt like last year with him sitting out and the fact that the team needed him, the legend of who he is as a player and what he was going to bring to the team kept growing and growing. And it got to a point where it's like, okay, yeah, he had some pretty good offensive games towards the end of that Sweet 16 run. But he had never been like a guy you want to call his number a lot on the offensive end and want to play through on the offensive end a lot. Remember, what made him good was him kind of taking a back step offensively and being like, I don't need to look for my shot. I can just be a role guy and sort of be more of a glue, hustle piece for this team. And I would say, like, I wouldn't expect too much out of him from an offensive standpoint. I don't think that's going to be his role on this team, but I do think he'll be fine overall.
I think people remember the fact that the last two times you saw him play were basically his two best collegiate performances, outside of the Texas game, of course. But when you think back to Kennesaw State and Pitt, those might have been the best two games he played in college in his career.
Yeah.
And that's the lasting memory of him. So it is what it is. And that's not to say that's not buried down there somewhere. That's just not who he is consistently. He'd tell you that. I mean, the coaching staff knows that. That's why he's playing in the role he's in. It's just that's what everybody who watches him play remembers of him.
Yeah, and understandably so, because it was impressive. He did do more offensively in those games where he looked like, okay, maybe he's capable of taking on a bigger role like they thought all along when he was a high school prospect, right? But I think especially coming off of everything he's coming off of from last season, that's not going to be the role he plays for this team. And that's totally fine. Four or five shots is more than enough for him, I think. You just got to start making a couple of those shots and make sure you're taking the right shots. That's all I had in terms of those concerns from the game. Were there anything else that really stood out to you? I have one more question I want to ask you about, but any other specific concerns that you saw that we need to address?
I don't think so.
Okay, so along those same lines, we talked about the fact that the team really struggled from a bench perspective, and outside of Swain, Conwell, McKnight, and Fremantle, the rest of the team went 0 for 16. So, Paul, my question for you is, and I'll share the screen here.
Okay.
So people can see the box score.
Oh, man. Here we go.
All right. Who out of the guys who went over from the field in this game? So Marcus Foster, Trey Green, Jerome Hunter, John Hughley, and Dante Maddox. Who out of those guys are you most worried about coming out of this game?
As a whole or shooting?
From their performance as a whole, just who is the guy that you're like, I'm just not sure if he's going to get on track and give this team what they're looking for?
I'd say Dante Maddox, because I think you're really expecting a lot out of him this year. And initially I kind of went toward Trey Green, but I just don't know how much you can really demand out of Trey Green coming into the season. Dante Maddox, I think a lot of people are expecting to play a pretty significant role. And this isn't a trend that I don't really expect it to continue, but it can't continue, to be quite honest, for this team to really reach its peak. They need to have scoring off the bench. You can't have a game where Xavier gets 3 points of bench production. That just isn't, that can't happen for this team to have success.
Yeah, with Dante specifically, it's not just the fact that you need him to score, but it's also like, if you come in off the bench, we need minutes from you, but you have to be solid, right? Like, you can't be getting lost on the defensive end or giving up a backdoor cut for a layup or something like that. So those types of things are going to have to be solidified as well, in addition to him fixing the scoring aspect. The scoring thing, I think, will take care of itself. He is an aggressive player, a confident player, and he's a good shooter. So I'm not as worried about him from that standpoint. The guy I would go to, and I think I go here because, one, I'm a little bit more concerned about whether or not he can get on track, and two, the team needs him more than anyone. That's John Hughley. I mean, they need another center to go along with Zach Fremantle that they can rely on for double-digit minutes at least, 10 to 15 bare minimum. And right now, I don't know that they feel like they have that with John Hughley, based on what we saw in this game where he only played 6 minutes.
And defensively, too. I mean, that one play he got beat under the basket, that was just a very simple cut to a layup. That can't happen.
Yeah. All right, Paul. So that pretty much does it in terms of things I wanted to touch on in this podcast. Were there any other extraneous thoughts you had from the game?
I just think overall, I just really wasn't all that concerned about this game from a 10,000 foot perspective of this season. I really wasn't. I think we have enough to go on about this team to know that they will be okay going forward. A lot of teams have struggled in game one. There have also been some teams that have had great game ones that not go on to not play a great season. So, I mean, I'm not going to sit here after kind of a funky, choppy, all the fouls, the wacky threes, everything else that happened in this game. Yes, absolutely. Xavier should have won this game by a lot more than 9 points. The metrics ding them for it. They got the win. They move on. Now they play two very bad teams. I mean, of the bye games, I think this was the best bye game that Xavier will play by a pretty wide margin. Maybe South Carolina State. But I mean, this was the best bye game. IU Indy is the second or third worst team in the country. Jackson State is 331. Siena's 328. South Carolina State's 274. But Morgan State's 312. You shouldn't have problems with these teams. We should be talking next week about 40-point wins. And if you're not, then the metrics, again, they start to catch up with you, because you got to blow these teams out. You got to do it.
And that is the point of scheduling them. Like, people are wondering, why is the schedule weaker? And that's why. I mean, they are trying to manipulate the net the same way Xavier used to be really good at manipulating the RPI. The way you do that now is by boosting your efficiency metrics, by playing a team that's the worst in the country on the offensive end or the worst in the country on the defensive end, or at least as close as you can get to that. The upcoming schedule, they play IU Indy on Friday night at 6 p.m., then Jackson State on Tuesday at 8:30 p.m. And I would imagine we'll try to do some type of podcast. I don't know what your availability is like, Paul, but I'll have something out after that Jackson State game, after we see these next two games, before they play Wake Forest in the Skip Prosser Classic the following Saturday, November 16th. That game is at noon. Once again, we have a 50% off sale going on at musketeerreport.com. The message board is rolling. If you want to join in the conversation, you want the pregame scouting reports for all of Xavier's games, you want to be where all of the top Xavier fans are talking college basketball, sign up for Musketeer Report right now and get 50% off an annual subscription. That's less than $5 per month. Paul, anything else before we sign off here? Anything cooking on your guys' side of things that you need to get out there?
I'll pub the podcast again, the Sean Miller podcast, All In, the docuseries. I'm sure you've seen it. I'm sure you've heard about it if you haven't already. Just in case I don't make it to a Musketeer Report show next week, next Tuesday, so a week from right now when we're recording, 11:30, Fox 19, after the news, and then it'll be November the next 12th, day on the
right?
November 12th. Yep.
November 12th.
And then on the Sean Miller podcast YouTube channel the day after. That's about the rebound rundown. How about that? Let's pub the rebound rundown too. I'm trying to grow that this year, Rick. Let's get that. You're going to be on that here tomorrow. Always appreciate you doing that. Would love, I had a couple of people come up and talk about listening to the rebound rundown to start their day. And I appreciate my loyal subscribers out there, because I try hard to grow the base, and it's a decent amount of work every night. So thanks to everybody for listening.
Yep, go check it out. It's the great thing about it is it's not like a long commitment. It's not like this podcast where you got to listen for 30 minutes or an hour each time. It's like it's 7 a quick minutes. Drive or a quick walk, and you're in, you're out. You got your update for the regional college basketball team. So check out the Rebound Rundown podcast. Paul, thank you for another great episode of the Musketeer Report podcast, and we'll talk to all you guys on the message board.